Imagine walking into a dark so absolute you cannot see your own hand in front of your face. The only light is a tiny flickering open flame attached to your canvas cap. The air is heavy, thick with the smell of sulfur, and so choked with black dust that every breath feels like swallowing glass. Overhead, the massive wooden timbers groan under the unimaginable weight of an entire mountain pressing down on you. This was not a nightmare. This was an ordinary Tuesday morning for the coal miners of Monongah, West Virginia. They called it the Black Gold. At the dawn of the 20th century, the American empire ran on coal. It fired the steel mills of Pittsburgh, powered the locomotives crossing the continent, and heated the homes of a skyrocketing population. To the captains of industry, it was a source of unimaginable wealth. But to the men who mined it, it was a daily gamble with a cruel and unforgiving darkness. Deep in the hills of West Virginia, the Consolidated Coal Company had turned the small town of Monongah into a booming industrial powerhouse. Mines number 6 and number 7 were considered state-of-the-art. They were interconnected deep underground, sharing ventilation networks and hauling systems designed to maximize efficiency and extract thousands of tons of coal every single day. To fuel this massive operation, the company turned to an endless supply of cheap labor, newly arrived European immigrants. They were men and boys who spoke little to no English, desperate to carve out a living in the new world. On the morning of December 6th, 1907, the official company ledger recorded 367 miners entering the interconnected tunnels of mines 6 and 7. But official records in the coal country were notoriously deceptive. Historians know that many miners brought their young sons, brothers, and cousins down into the dark as unregistered helpers to increase their daily tonnage. The true number of souls inside the mountain that morning was likely well over 450. The conditions they worked in were a ticking time bomb. The Fairmont field was notorious for being gassy. As miners picked away at the coal face, invisible pockets of highly explosive methane gas bled constantly into the air. Worse still was the coal dust hanging suspended in the stagnant air. In 1907, ventilation technology was primitive, and corporate safety laws were virtually non-existent. The men were working inside a gunpowder keg. And at exactly 10:28 a.m., a single mechanical failure at the surface lit the fuse. The fragile illusion of safety at Monongah shattered in an instant. The catalyst was not a reckless miner or a faulty lamp, but a mechanical failure on the surface. At mine number 6, a string of 19 loaded coal cars, reeling under the weight of tons of black rock, was being hauled up the steep surface incline. Suddenly, a coupling snapped. The heavy iron cars groaned, paused for a terrifying second, and then began to hurtle backward. They gathered violent speed, careening down the slope and plunging straight back into the mouth of the mine. At the bottom of the incline, the runaway train smashed into a massive electrical wreck. Heavy iron wheels tore through high-voltage power lines, ripping them from the timber ceilings. The severed cables snapped violently through the air, spitting brilliant, blinding blue sparks into the pitch-black cavern. In any other environment, it would have been a costly industrial accident. In the volatile belly of mine number 6, it was a death sentence. The brilliant electrical arcs instantly ignited a pocket of localized methane gas. The initial gasp of flame was small, but it acted as a detonator.
The shockwave from the gas ignition instantly kicked up the millions of particles of fine coal dust resting on the floor, the walls, and the timber beams. The air itself became fuel. What followed was not a single bang, but a terrifying dual explosion that tore through the mountain. The dust ignited in a roaring chain reaction, feeding on itself as it ripped down the narrow tunnels at thousands of miles per hour. The blast wave surged through the underground connection points, instantly breaching Mine Number 7. The sheer force of the explosion was cataclysmic. On the surface, the earth violently buckled. Heavy wooden tipples and massive concrete structures at the mine entrances were pulverized into shrapnel. A shockwave rattled windows and knocked dishes from shelves in homes miles away from the town of Monongah. Sidewalks cracked, and a thick, unnatural black cloud of dust erupted from the earth, blotting out the morning sun. Inside the mountain, the blast stripped away massive oak support beams like toothpicks, triggering a catastrophic domino effect of collapsing stone. For the hundreds of men working miles deep in the dark, the world had just caved in.
As the smoke cleared from the shattered entrances of mines number 6 and number 7, a horrifying silence fell over Monongah. At the surface, the blast had been so violent it shattered windows in homes miles away. Within minutes, hundreds of frantic wives, mothers, and children rushed through the freezing December air toward the mine tipples, desperate for news. But the scene that met them was one of absolute ruin. The massive ventilation fans, the very lungs of the mine, lay in twisted, smoking heaps of metal. Without them, no fresh air was being pumped into the earth. Realizing the stakes, groups of brave volunteer miners formed immediate rescue crews. They grabbed lanterns and picks, pushing past the wreckage and descending directly into the mouth of the mountain. They were walking straight into hell. They didn't get far. The physical devastation inside the tunnels was total. Heavy iron tracks were twisted like ribbon, support timbers were splintered into kindling, and massive roof collapses blocked the passages every few yards. But the physical obstacles weren't the real enemy. The true killer, waiting in the dark, was invisible. The dual explosions had instantly consumed all the oxygen inside the mountain, replacing it with a deadly, toxic cocktail of gases known to miners as black damp. Composed primarily of carbon dioxide and nitrogen, black damp is completely odorless, tasteless, and invisible. It suffocates a man, silently. Within seconds of breathing it, a person's muscles weaken, their mind grows confused, and they slip into a fatal unconsciousness without ever realizing they are dying. The rescue crews, lacking modern oxygen tanks or gas masks, began to collapse from the fumes just hundreds of feet into the tunnels. Pitifully, out of the hundreds of men trapped deep inside, only one single miner, an immigrant named Peter Urban, was successfully reached and pulled out alive by the early rescue teams. For the rest of the hundreds of souls trapped deeper in the maze, there would be no rescue. The air inside the mountain had become entirely lethal. By nightfall, the grim reality set in. The rescue mission was over. It was now a recovery operation. The volunteers had to wait for hours as engineers desperately tried to patch together makeshift wooden versions of the ventilation fans, just to clear enough toxic air so that recovery teams could begin the agonizing process of bringing out the dead. In the days that followed, the small community of Monongah transformed into a landscape of unimaginable grief. As recovery teams slowly cleared the toxic air and ventured deeper into the ruins, they began the grim task of bringing the victims to the surface. Body after body was carried out of the dark, caked in soot and horribly burned. The town's meager facilities were instantly overwhelmed. A local bank building was hastily converted into a temporary morgue, where grieving mothers and wives walked down rows of bodies, desperately searching for a familiar piece of clothing or a distinct personal item to identify their loved ones. The final, official death toll was placed at 362. However, because so many immigrant workers had brought their unregistered young sons and brothers down into the mines as helpers, historians estimate the true number of lives lost was well over 450. The disaster utterly shattered the social fabric of the town. Monongah became known across the country as the Town of Widows. Overnight, more than 250 women lost their husbands, and over 1,000 children were left fatherless. Entire families were wiped out in a single second, leaving rows of small, newly dug mass graves stretching across the bleak West Virginia hillsides. As the nation reeled from the scale of the horror, the public demanded accountability. Yet, in typical fashion for the era, the Fairmont Coal Company deflected blame, pointing to worker carelessness rather than their own complete lack of safety infrastructure. But the sacrifice of the Monongah miners could not be entirely swept under the rug. The sheer scale of the tragedy became the catalyst for a massive turning point in American labor history. Public outrage forced the United States Congress to take action, leading directly to the creation of the United States Bureau of Mines in 1910, an agency tasked with finally regulating the industry and enforcing strict safety standards underground. Mines number 6 and number 7 eventually reopened, and for decades longer, men continued to descend into the dark hills of Monongah to fuel the growth of an industrial superpower. Today, a small granite monument stands near the site, a quiet reminder of the day the mountain broke. It is a sobering reminder that the towering infrastructure, the vast wealth, and the rapid progress of the modern world were bought and paid for with a heavy human price. The next time you look at the towering achievements of the past, remember the men and boys of Monongah who stepped out of the morning light and vanished forever into the suffocating dark.